Another episode of Emotional Nightmares. I am your host. My name is Tyler. And on today's episode, we have with us an author who wrote a book about mental health. So we're going to have her on today. So first off, I'm going to go ahead and have you kind of introduce yourself a little bit. And, also kind of explain to us, first off, what inspired you to write this book.
Well, I'm Julia. I have a website, thejuliaoftheberg.com, where I am working as a mindset, beauty, and lifestyle coach. I decided to write this book 2 years ago. I was interviewed on my friend who has a podcast, a health and wellness podcast. She wanted to talk about mental illness and mental illness journeys. And while I was taking notes for that podcast and doing the interview, she happened to mention to her audience I was writing a book, which I didn't know I was writing a book. So it kind of like prompted the idea. And then other people, after hearing the interview, were like, you should really put this into writing and share your story. So that January, I was part of an accountability group with a bunch of women who we would hold each other responsible for our goals and different things. And we made vision boards, and I wrote on the vision board, she speaks out on a public platform about mental health. She helps to break the stigma surrounding mental illness labels. And then just kind of without even thinking, I wrote she's a published author. And then that year, I ended up competing in a national pageant, the United States of America pageant systems. I was Mrs. Southeast, and I started a blog and just kind of posting little stories. And then by the end of summer, those stories started coming together. And that October, I had a finished, just like a pre-manuscript. And then I went through a self-publishing agency and was published by this February.
You really spoke it into existence.
Yeah,
And I like that.
The other podcast host was like, she's writing this book. And it turned into, it was kind of cathartic at first, just healing to write my story and put boundaries on it, where before it's this big thing that's kind of like in your mind and out there, and it's trauma, it's whatever it is, but I got to reclaim it as my own and tell my story. So.
Nice. I did get to read some of the book, so I do like the narrative of it, because first of all, the name of your book, right? You're not defined by by your diagnosis.
You are not your diagnosis.
You are not your diagnosis. So I like that because what it does do is it takes away the narrative, because there's such a stigma around mental health, right? Such a negative stigma. And I like in a sense, you kind of own your own, saying, no, I got these issues, but it's okay, right? And one of the things we talk a lot about is trying to teach people that, man, it's okay to not be okay, right? And but you have to ask for help. You have to be able to say, it's okay. And I think your book, from, the parts that I did read, it really does a good job at breaking that stigma from it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody said this to me once in recovery. They said, if you had kidney disease, you would take dialysis. It doesn't mean you are kidney disease, or you have heart disease, you might take a statin or a medication for your heart. You're not defined by that label. But when it comes to mental illness, we somehow intertwine this with people and their identity and who they are and their personalities, when really it's an organ that's misfiring and we're trying to offer it support. And I think when I started looking at it that way, and I started not identifying as someone who yes, I have bipolar illness, I am not bipolar illness. So,
right.
Yeah.
No, I like that. So let's go a little deep here. So what was the particular moment that was kind of the turning point in your own mental health journey?
There's a couple. So a lot of people say like, what was your rock bottom or what was like your pivotal moment? I think in my mental health journey, I hit rock bottom and then I kept hitting rock bottom and I didn't
Mm,
know how deep the bottom would get. In 2008, I had an attempted suicide attempt, and that really, surviving that, um, gave me just a little more clarity, but it wouldn't be until 2012 that I would realize, wait, I actually do have something I'm suffering from. And I ended up spending 3 nights in jail for disorderly conduct, and I was manic, and that experience in the jail cell kind of accelerated me into a psychosis. And from there, I spent 30 days in a local state hospital, and then a local hospital, then was transferred to the state hospital for 4 months. So at that age, gosh, I was maybe 27, 28, and I spent 5 months isolated, not isolated, but isolated from my community in institution. And coming out of that, I just went into a really deep depression. And I was realizing I'm about to hit 30 years old. And I've spent a decade cycling in and out of hospitals. And I just really didn't want that anymore. So trying to figure out, okay, what I have to accept this if I'm going to change it.
hmm
And then I spent really the next 5 years finding just med compliance being that one thing that changed things for me. And then I had another rock bottom probably in 2020, which, a
COVID.
long distance away, but everyone did. But I also, mine was like preceded by pregnancy, birth trauma, and we had a preemie in the NICU, and then all
Mm,
mothers, there is a postpartum journey, and at that 18-month mark when hormones should be regulating, I was climbing into mania during the time the world was shutting down, and that my weight was out of control. I had just had a baby. I was trying anything to lose weight. I was still into extremes. I think part of my illness is that I cling on to extremes. So I was doing like extreme fasting, extreme cleansing, and I had dislodged gallstones and ended up having my gallbladder out during the summer of 2020, and the anesthesia, the medications, the combination of just not really understanding health and wholeness as a wellness, like a holistic approach, but trying just to be med compliant and do other things, but not realizing they're related. It
right.
spiraled me, and by September of that year, 2020, I was rapid cycling. I went into a hospital for a week, came out, and then went back into a hospital 2 months later. I spent the week before Christmas in a hospital, and then I spent January of 2021 in a hospital for a whole month. And that really was different this time because I was a mom. My son turned 2. I missed his second birthday while I was in the hospital. I missed my uh, 3-year wedding anniversary in the hospital, and I came out right before my birthday. My birthday's in February. And I said, this time, this is enough. Like, I cannot lose myself again. I'm a mom. Like, before, no one else was really suffering the consequences of my illness.
Right.
But as a new mom, I think even though I had hit rock bottom in 2012 and accepted my illness, 2020 gave me a new approach to health and wellness because I was like, I gotta figure this out. My weight can't be 300 pounds. I need to live for my son, right? I can't, it's not just med compliance because there's side effects of these medications. Yes, I have mental health, but I'm exchanging my physical health. So I really started looking into everything that could be a root cause, that could be a contributing factor. And that's when I really changed my approach to how I looked at my mental health and how I treated it. Yeah.
Okay. So the most interesting thing, right? So I always find it interesting because we always talk about like in mental health. Well, it doesn't affect anybody. It's just affecting me, right? But if we break that down and go further into childhood, right, in your teenage years, and I can imagine that the reality is that it affected a lot more than what we give credit to, right? Like it affects like everybody around us. I'm sure your parents were affected, the people in your household, um, especially with bipolar and the ups and downs and the manic episodes. Although And sometimes that mania can be addicting as well too. I know
Oh, yeah.
sometimes when you get into mania, it feels like, wow, I can actually get stuff done.
Well, and I also think like it was masked more in childhood. We
Yeah,
really didn't
sure.
have we didn't know. My parents didn't know. I was just that hyper child who
Yeah,
kept myself so busy that they just thought the energy was because I was going to sports, I was doing school, I was doing cheerleading, I was doing clubs. But there if now that we have that diagnosis and there was that big breaking point, we can look back and say, "Oh," and point to pieces in childhood like that was because of this and
right.
yeah, and those are early signs. We just didn't know what to call them.
So when you're writing your book, right, how did that impact your healing journey?
Can you rephrase that question? I'm not sure I understand what you're asking.
When you're writing your book, right, and so you're sitting down and you're writing about like, you know what, I'm not defined by this thing that
Right.
everybody's been defining me as, because you know, going in and out of hospitals and everything, everybody's always asking that age-old question, you know, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Nobody's stopping and saying like, what happened to you, right? So when you yourself you're putting it together like this is what happened, right? So you're starting to write this book about I'm not defined by this. How did that help you in the healing process from all this?
Yeah, it well, it was very cathartic. It was very therapeutic in the aspect I had all these things that had happened to me, but I had also contributed to happening. And by sitting down and writing this experience and some of the contributing traumas and experiences that led to where I was, it before it's something I could think about and would be triggered about or activated by like they say the body keeps score, so certain seasons would come, I'd have memories, certain events. For example, I was riding a train and I didn't understand why, but I got very like unsettled, anxiety, fearful, and then had to remember, oh, there was an experience where I was manic and psychotic on a train, and this is triggering that. So by taking ownership of my story and writing these experiences down, it put walls and boundaries on the experience, and it gave me the narrative. It, I got to say the narrative. I got to tell what happened. I got to contain it and in an aspect not detach from it, but like see it objectively as an observer and not just
Yeah.
it's happened to me, but I wrote it. I can read it and I can put it away and I can say this happened, but this is where I'm at now and this is why I'm at where I'm at now, and while this contributed and it affects me, I'm healing from it, and I'm taking ownership of it as not just it happening to me, but as a participant in it. And that and the aspect was very healing because it gave me permission to just share to let it be what it is,
Yeah. I
not
like
let
that.
other people define it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So, because I think one of the big things about breaking the stigma is being able to have that open conversation, right? And to be able to have that open conversation, like I always tell people, like, no, you tell me your story. Like, don't let me define you. Like, I want you to tell me what happened. Like, instead of like somebody giving you that narrative.
And I took that approach writing the story. Like I remember when I would write, I would get a little anxiety, like, ooh, people aren't going to believe this, or people are going to think this is crazy. And but then I had to remember, wait, I know what I thought was happening. I know what kind of was happening based on like the situation. But I had to write from the aspect of even if I was in psychosis, this is what I was experiencing. So I think um, writing from that perspective was also healing in an aspect because I didn't have to make it logical.
Right.
I didn't have to make it make sense to the reader. I just was sharing what I experienced, and no one can take away my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. So let me ask you this, right? So, because you spend a lot of times in the hospitals, right? State hospitals, nonetheless, and I'm
They
sure you
did.
got some horror stories in there.
I didn't write
Um,
about those. That could be a whole nother book.
yeah, that's the next one. Um,
Maybe not.
But so going through all that though, how do I phrase this question? What what do you wish so you've met a lot of mental health providers, right? So in that process of meeting all these so-called professionals, right? Um, what do you wish they would have done differently when messing like when trying to give you your diagnosis and everything? What do you wish they would have done differently?
So 20 years ago in the mental health industry to now is very different. The practices they allowed. I will say it's gotten better. Is it there yet? No. But I really think
I mean, it was barbaric back then.
it
You
was
could say it.
barbaric. Yeah, I was a
We're not
127
politically
pound
correct on this channel.
female who was restrained by seven grown men.
Yeah,
Chaining you to beds and you're urinating yourself because you're chained to a bed. They want you to stay quiet and still. I'm like, could you ask a toddler to do this? Could you ask a grown adult to be handcuffed for 7 hours and not go crazy, even if they're not manic?
right.
So it just, I think, and then taking someone who had come through physical abuse and then putting your hands on them and restraining them, that just didn't make sense to me. Or just the trans even there's a lot, but if I could make one statement about how I wish it was different is listen to your patients and believe them. Like a lot of times they like I would go into a hospital and I'd be like, well, this was my medicine, this is what works. This is not what works. This dose you're going to make me, and they'd overload you with so many medications and cocktails and they wouldn't listen to what you were experiencing. They like, oh no,
Yeah.
you just need more medicine. But like I learned in my journey, I'm not at a therapeutic dose. I'm on a sliver of a dose and it holds me. When you put me on a therapeutic dose, you exacerbate my symptoms and make them worse. And then they keep trying to throw meds at you and they're like, well, you're just getting worse. You're not getting better. And they don't take any responsibility that they're the one. Like I use the phrase, those hospitals make you worse before they make you better. And if you
Mm.
don't get out in time, you will leave. It can make you like there's a lot of good aspects about them, but there's a lot that can make you worse too. And I just think there's so many wishes that could be a it just but I really think conversation with patients who've been through the process, conversation with their families, and conversations with the doctors and nurses. We all need to sit together and have conversation about the experiences and conversation about what works and doesn't. And if the doctors would listen to those who've come through to the other side of their journey about what works and what doesn't, maybe there could be reform and change because you have people who don't suffer from the illness or aren't affected by it by a family member and they're making these decisions on how to treat a person and you get to a state hospital and your parents, your family, yeah, they have a case manager and they're trying to figure out what works and doesn't, but they're not listening to your advocates. They're not listening to the patient and they're just doing what they think is going to work. And then they don't let your current doctor doesn't have reciprocity at the hospital, so they can't. It's just there's no continuity of care.
Yeah. No, I
So
agree
if,
with it.
if
That
I were to be picked up today and sent to the hospital and I said, this is my doctor, this is my plan, they're not going to contact my doctor.
right.
They're not going to listen to her. She's treated me for like 10 years. So it just,
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest problems. I think for me, like because like I work in that world in my real life, and I think a lot of the issue is so many people want to have a voice that shouldn't. Like they want to be like, well, this is gonna help the person, but they've never been there, and you always see that conflict. And I always see, and I think, and I agree with you. I think people need to do more listening. I know. One of the things that's always bothered me is you meet somebody for an hour, you go through, your little questionnaires and everything. How the hell are you giving them medication after that hour? Like you don't really, just because the DSM-5 says this is what should be, or I think we're on DSM-6 now, but it doesn't necessarily mean throw all this medication. I feel like you should at least have, we have a therapist around here that does um, she meets with them, like you're going to meet with her at least 5 times before she even talks to you about medication. And that's because she wants to know, like, tell me the whole story, you know?
so much that goes into somebody's health. Like
But
if
yeah,
you're not considering their diet, their sleep patterns, their substance use, if you're not considering just their biology, in their medical history, you're really just throwing coins in a well. Like you're just guessing because I follow this doctor, Dr. Amen, who's a little controversial. He is a psychiatrist and he had the Amen clinics and was at Bernard Shaw clinics in DC in 2008, and he started doing brain scans on his patients to actually look at the brain, and then from his research and his studies, he could see what the medicine's doing on the scan, like what's lighting up.
Oh,
And
wow.
he would find patterns in his patients who are diagnosed with certain conditions. And he's like, we're trying to treat someone, but we're not looking at the organ that we're treating.
Yeah.
And he talks a lot about how your gut health is linked to your brain health, linked to your emotional health, and then you have your experiences, which are compounding on top of that. So really, medication is a tool. It's a great tool, but it shouldn't be your first choice in the line of care.
Yeah.
It really needs to be like that last resort after you've tried. Maybe you just need magnesium.
Yeah.
Maybe you need to take some supplements and get the junk out of your diet, or maybe you were just around a bunch of assholes and you need some talk therapy and you
Yeah.
need to cry and you need to have someone listen to what happened to you and feel validated, you know? Maybe you don't need medication. Maybe you need to change your situation.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, because like I deal a lot with substance abuse, but they're one and the same. Every single person that has substance abuse has mental health. And that's kind of what this channel, the point of my channel is kind of to combine the two and like to kind of make people realize that like you can have mental health without substance abuse, but you can't have substance abuse without mental health. Like
Right.
you could be like a heavy drinker, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an alcoholic. And like, we deal with the people that have crossed the line. You know what I mean? Like me myself, I know if I have a drink, I'm gonna go commit felonies tomorrow, like immediately. So, um, and I think a lot of that is like being able to explain to people that like let's try the talk therapy. Let's talk through the trauma and get through that part before we get into medication. Um, but I mean, 100%, the mental health field is really big on like, here, just take these pills, like, and just throwing pills at you.
I used to joke I'm addicted to my medication because if I were to stop it, it
Me
would be
too.
like
Mine was
coming off of the
Oxycontin.
narcotic. Well, yeah, but it's like when you think of substance use, that's what it is. It's self-medicating.
Yeah, 100%.
You're trying to find something to either numb the trauma or balance the pain. You're filling a gap, or you're reaching for this pleasure that you're not having in your life, or I mean, I can't explain to you why people use, whether it's escape, pleasure, numbing. There's so many reasons why people use, but I may not have became danger to myself with substances, but I was putting myself in danger by the other addictions and vices I was having,
Hmm.
you know?
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, so it just, I know that for some people the shopping need can become an addiction when they're having a mental health crisis, and they'll spend all their money or they'll gamble. The illicit sex with strangers, just, putting yourself out there because you're just constantly seeking something. Um,
Hmm.
Even like food can become an addiction that is damaging, like if you're searching to numb or for pleasure or for anything. So I completely understand the link between mental illness and substance use. And I think those that suffer with mental illness, you listen to them long enough, you're going to find their vice. It may not be a substance, but you're gonna see there's some vice they're using. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, what are some of the common misconceptions about people living with mental health that you hope that your book challenges?
There's no look to mental health. You can't look at someone and say, "Oh, they have a mental illness." Like you can't you have the old saying, you can't judge a book by its cover. There's no what's the word I'm looking for? There's no bias when it comes to mental health. Anyone can suffer from it. And at the time I published my book, I was a beauty pageant title holder. I had all these accomplishments. I was working with a mental health organization. I was being interviewed on podcasts. I'm a wife and a mom, and we own our own home, and I hate to say it, but you look at me and people be like, well, you don't look like you're someone who's been in and out of hospitals or suffering with an illness. But I think, and then take the flip side, you could look at someone and say, oh yeah, they're suffering, and maybe they're not. Maybe they just have a different look, or they have different, um, I know that where we live, we have a homeless population, and a lot of people want to say, oh, they're just suffering from mental illness, they're not taking their meds. And while that may be a case for some who are homeless, that is not the cause of homelessness. That's not the
Right.
issue and the reason people are homeless. So I think you won't know by looking at someone if they have a mental illness, you know?
Sure.
Yeah, so
You
I
were
feel
in
like
beauty pageants, right?
it,
So how did that affect your mental health? Because that's a whole nother world all on its own.
it was empowering. I
Okay.
a lot of people can say, "Oh, you're being judged by your looks," but I really feel that in that pageant, that was, I mean, maybe like out of 10 points, that was one point they considered is how you actually look. But really, it was empowering because I'm on stage with these women I admire, and they've all worked so hard to get there. Their resumes are a mile long. They're doing community service. They're working to inspire other women and create communities of change. And the interview process alone, when you go into a pageant world, is something I've never experienced before. And I know a lot of people say pageants are won in the interview, the one-on-one interviews with the judges. And those women, like, you really have to have a plan of action. You have to have a purpose for why you're there. And yes, they, like, a lot of them are very beautiful by society standards, but I think the word empowered comes to mind. Yeah, to be able to put myself out there and be like, okay, judge me. Judge me on
Yeah.
everything and compare me. And really it's subjective to what five strangers thought that day. It yeah. And for me, like, I had just turned 40, and I had regained my health and my wellness, and my platform was "You're not your diagnosis. Let's end the stigma that surrounds mental health labels." And I was able to stand on a stage and say, while I went through this, this is not who I am, and you're not labeled or defined by your trauma, your illness, or anything you're going through. And if I can do this, you can do it too. Yeah.
Nice. So one of the biggest questions I know I get asked a lot, and I'll ask you is when when going through like some of your psychosis, some of your stuff like that, right? How can someone that is a part of your circle that you love, that loves you, what is the best way they can support you?
That is so hard because I will say some of the best support I have are people I don't talk to anymore. The tough love, the ones that while you're in psychosis, take a hands-off approach and they listen to you, but they encourage you to go seek treatment.
Right?
Like, they don't feed into the delusion or okay, so let's define psychosis. I think when people hear the word psychosis, it's so taboo that they like throw hands up and they want to be like, ooh, psychosis, and they think like people who are shooting up schools or doing something, radical. So for me, psychosis was when I would have very pressured speech that isn't logical. I would start a sentence maybe in the middle of a thought, disconjointed thoughts. I had no discernment between reality and spiritual delusion, whatever you want to call it. Um, Laws of nature and laws of science didn't apply. Like, so the law of inertia, objects in motion stay in motion. Like, you're driving and you have no concept that maybe I'm driving 80 miles per hour. So I'm not
Right?
going to get good. I feel good. And I think
Disassociation.
there's no disassociation, and your common sense is just gone. So you're operating from a different standpoint and a different reality. Like, let's just say it, even though it may not be reality, your reality is delusions. And and you can either feel really good in that, and you can have a very high, euphoric, loving nature. But I think if you get cornered in that aspect, you may get aggressive. Some people get aggressive, some people shut down. Like the fight or flight, like your nervous system is shocked and your flight and flight is on. So your adrenaline, your cortisol, everything's pumping. And um, the best thing someone can do in that situation to help you is to get you help. Because really, if your body stays in that fight or flight, you could cause damage to your heart, you could cause damage to your other organs. So pulling you out of that psychosis and getting you to the professionals who are trained to do that. And we've already talked, some professionals that are trained may not be the best at handling that, but
100%.
but I don't think it would be safe for someone try to do that without at least having some sort of training because yeah.
No, I agree with
Yeah,
that.
so it's a tricky question. Like I think, and I will say this, there's a window. So when I would start to climb into mania, there's probably about a 2 week window where I realize it's happening and I'm seeking, this is the fault with the system I wish would change. So there's about a 2 week window when I'm hypomanic versus hypermanic, and the difference is one is like functioning, one is creeping into psychosis, right?
Hmm.
And the hypomanic state, I may be starting things, I may be accomplishing things, I may be like, it's actually not a bad thing. I'm getting things done. But the more I go without sleep and the more I start to climb, I'll start to realize that, and there'll be this little window where I'll say I need help, I need medicine. But the problem is that it's not that it's too late. It's just that there's no intervention that really helps at that point because there's nothing like you'll call the crisis line and you're not in crisis enough to reach critical level where they'll hospitalize you. You don't meet criteria.
I
But
hate
then you
that
can't
word.
get into the doctor soon enough. And it's not, and your regular medicines may take 2 to 3 weeks to set in, like to reach their level, and you need like an emergency dose of something to bring you down. And if you don't get pulled down when you're in that state, you're gonna climb, and then within a week, you're gonna get to a point where you're not gonna listen and want help. You're gonna feel too good. It's
Yeah, I
like a
hate that.
triple, it's like a combo. And if they, I will say I have a safety plan in place. I've been in treatment 20 years. I've been with the same doctor 10. We know my patterns. I have medications called PRNs, which are as needed.
Hmm.
If I take a PRN more than so many times a day, so many days in a row, I know I need to increase my meds. If that's happening and nothing's helping, I have a one dose emergency medicine I can take that'll it's like a tranquilizer, it'll just knock me out, reset me, but then I have to, so we have a plan in place. And but I think unfortunately a lot of people who are just experiencing their illness for the first time or maybe not be in a maintenance state, they're still in a cycle, they may not have that. And they may not have a relationship with a doctor or a trusted individual to help catch them in that window. So listening when they're climbing and listening when they're asking for help, because once they're in psychosis, you've kind of put them in a place where they really need, and I hate to say this because I don't like being institutionalized myself, but they're going to need some sort of overnight care and stay to stabilize a crisis stabilization situation.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes you get stuck between the gatekeepers, so to say.
Hmm.
I hate the whole they don't meet criteria.
It's like if they're asking for help, let them go.
Yeah, I
If they
feel like
want to
this
be there, put them there.
that's the biggest change I wish the system would do is if you're asking for help, just give them help. Like how often does
Even if it's
somebody
an
ask for help?
outpatient. Yeah, like they need something.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So, for somebody that's listening that may be newly diagnosed with some form of mental health, um, I think one of the biggest things that you said that was very important was I have a safety plan in place, right? And it's understanding that like it's okay to have that plan in place because it's okay to not be okay. And like when you're not okay, if you have that plan in place that says, if X, Y, and Z happens immediately, we have to do A, B, C.
Hmm.
Like that prevents so much things. And we talk about that in substance abuse all the time with like the relapse prevention. And in mental health, we don't talk about that. Like we don't talk enough about like, man, get a safety plan in place.
One of the most important things that was said to me was during my first time ever in a hospital. The doctor, like when I was leaving, the doctor said, if you go 3 nights with less than 5 hours of sleep, you need to take something to sleep. And I brushed it off, and that was, oh God, that was like 22 years ago that was said to me. But that has been so important. And I know that sleep and sleep hygiene is critical to my mental health. And that for me is a trigger. And even though like it may seem like, okay, I slept 5 hours this night, I slept seven that night, I slept four, but if I'm not getting consistent sleep, even if I don't feel any symptoms or anything, being faithful to making sure that I'm getting sleep and adjusting my meds is been pivotal in preventing a relapse. And then also just knowing like once knowing how what it feels like when you're climbing or when you're going down. And I can only talk to bipolar illness, but I know other people suffer other um, mental illnesses and triggers. But even if you're starting to feel yourself reminisce about trauma, that could be a clue. I need to talk to someone about this.
Mm.
If a song comes on and it puts you in a sort of way, maybe turn off the song. if
Yeah.
if you're around certain individuals that tend to activate you, get help changing that environment. Yeah. And just it's okay to not be okay. I love that you said that. I love that because asking for help is one of the biggest things, and just recognizing your own condition and that it's okay. You're
Yeah.
not alone. You're not the only one to have experienced this, and yeah, advocate for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. So I pick up your book for the first time, right? Let's say I pick it up. What is the message that you hope someone receives from your book?
Well, the obvious one is you're not your diagnosis.
Well, yeah, that's the
That's
title.
kind
But
of
aside from
the
that,
title of the book. But it say they didn't look at the title and they just picked it up and started reading in the middle. I think that an underlining message could be there wellness and wholeness and healing is possible. And it doesn't have to look a certain way. That
I
it,
like
that
it.
that you define what healed is, you define what your recovery journey is. No one can tell you what that looks like and what the end goal is and what your hope is. But one thing I was told when I was first diagnosed bipolar is you may not be able to have kids, you may not be able to have a normal life, you'll always be on medications. And just not accepting other people's limitations.
Mm.
Hmm.
I think that's crucial for everything. I always tell people we create our own reality. If
Right?
you accept if somebody tells you you can't do this or you can't do that and you accept that, they are right, but you don't have to. We define the odds all day every day. Um, and it's very simple to do that. But if you're not being honest with yourself and being able to say like today I'm just not okay, you know, then that's a problem.
That's a great thing. I hope someone reading my book would be like, wow, she's being honest with herself.
Yeah.
Like some of the stuff may not be what other people were seeing, but she's being honest and
Yeah.
she's being authentic and yeah.
Well, I encourage everybody who's listening to pick up your book. You can get it on Apple. I know personally I read everything on Apple, so that's how I actually found
It's
your
my
book.
Apple.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's how I found it. It's on the Apple app. Uh,
Oh, great.
It's in the little bookstore here.
Well,
So
it's called You're Not Your Diagnosis.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the fact that you're trying to redefine something, and actually, you are not your diagnosis. I like it. When I first saw the title of your book, I was like, oh yeah, I would definitely want to have her come on, because that's kind of what we are over here. Is we're not defined by these labels the society gives us. So I appreciate you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, as always, you guys could have been anywhere in the world today, but you sat here and chose to listen to us. And for that, I greatly appreciate. I hope that you got something. If you didn't get something, um, find another channel. The point is that recovery's out there. We don't care how you get it or where you get it, as long as you get it. So again, keep listening. Tune in next time. So we appreciate you.